compliance with the agency stop work orders from 40% to 100% compliance. I wouldn't be afraid to make tough decisions. That's what we need in Congress. We need to make tough decisions, and we need to have the courage to do it. I will do that.
Thank you. So this next question from Mrs. Stebbins, starting with Mr. Shores, will be the last question in this round. To Mr. Shores.
Thank you. Mr. Shores, the President via executive orders is changing laws, including Obamacare, without the consent of Congress and in disregard of our constitutional form of government. What do you perceive as the solution to this dangerous practice?
It's a very good question. When I was in law school, I wrote a number of papers for course. I took seminar courses. I wrote about various issues relating to the separation of powers. I studied this part of the Constitution very carefully. Without question, President Obama is acting in an unconstitutional manner. He is essentially, particularly with respect to Obamacare, he is changing the law in order to make it work. He's actually repealing the law piece by piece, which is somewhat ironic. In fact, it is ironic that he's doing that. I believe that the framers created a government of limited powers. I don't think there can be any question about that. Limited powers. And there's three separate branches, and normally the branches will check themselves. There'll be a case or a controversy, someone will have standing to sue, and it ends up before the justices at the Supreme Court. This is a different circumstance because, and I've read about this, the scholars are saying that it may be difficult for anyone to have standing to sue on President Obama's actions. For example, a congressman, experts don't believe that a congressman would have standing to sue. And so, having trust in our framers, the question is, what can we do to stop the executive from exceeding his scope of his powers? And what we can do is vote the right representation into office and vote the wrong ones out.
Mark?
So this is a real conundrum, because when a sitting president violates his oath of office, violates the provisions of the Constitution, he should be impeached. However, I'm a little bit torn on this one, because this individual has demonstrated such overreach and incompetence that he's actually awakened the American population, and in a backhanded sort of way, may be the best thing that's happened to this country in many, many years. The fact of the matter, I'll discuss this a little bit in my closing statement as well. It's a subject I love to pontificate on. So the answer truly is impeachment. And then one has to assess, is it worth going through those gyrations and the damage? And that's a long and a difficult question to discuss. I say only half joking. I'm not sure if impeachment is the right answer right now. And I'm not sure if we're better with this president in or out. Let's take the Senate in November. And let's turn a lame duck into a dead duck president.
John?
I thought humor wasn't allowed.
Can't help it, okay?
But this disregard for the Constitution is absolutely reckless by this president. And first, I just want to state my admiration for the Constitution. It's the greatness of our nation grew out of this document. I would say I'm an originalist. I look to the plain meaning of the Constitution, and I apply common sense to its interpretation. I don't subscribe to the theory of those on the left attempting to reinterpret the Constitution in different contexts in today's modern world, and suggesting that the interpretation should evolve with the times. It's a great document that provides guiding principles to us today as a nation. We should always ask ourselves, what was the original intent of our forefathers when interpreting the Constitution and applying it to today's laws? It's too bad our president doesn't do that.
Vince?
Full disclosure, I started a company that couldn't have started unless Ronald Reagan had signed an executive order granting a set of circumstances that we could start our company and work with the Department of Defense. There is a place for executive orders. Certainly the one that got us into business wasn't a very big one, Every president has used them. Every Congress, except this one, has been troubled by them. James Madison said that when you're dealing with a president who's reckless and wants to usurp power, Congress must exert the power of the purse. We wrote that into the Constitution to bring presidents in line. Well, has this Congress stood up for their rights? It used to be if a president tried to take on too much, both sides would get together and say, we can't let this president infringe on our territory. That's the way it's supposed to work. The executive always should stand up for itself, and he does, but the legislative must also, and that's not happening. And as long as it does, you'll see all these executive orders and no standing to sue. And as Mark said, trying to impeach him wouldn't work for Republicans, especially in an election year, as we know. So Congress has to work together to exert its supremacy. And if I go there, I will fight hard for that, because when one branch of government gives up its power, the other two are out of balance. And that's what's happening now.
Thank you, gentlemen. So, in debates and in conversations that we all have, it's nice to discuss the issues and elaborate and go on and on. But when you become a member of Congress, or as Vinnie DiMacedo or Randy Hunt and I know, you get to vote on things, you don't always get to explain your vote. Sometimes you have to push the yes or the no button. So for the next round of questions, you get to push the yes or the no answer. So we have 4 questions from the panelists. We'll start with Mr. Allegro, and your response, candidates, is yes or no. You're very good on the time. Let's see if you can do this.
You should be happy we're not John Kerry, because he can't do yes or no.
Let's see how you do.
This from the Lincoln Douglas debates too?
Not quite. Mr. Neal, we'll start with Mr. Allegro on question 1 on the lightning round, yes or no.
All right, Dr. Allegro, while it is wonderful to have 4 strong candidates for the Republican nomination for the 9th District, sometimes those who are not successful in a primary simply refuse to help that nominee. Do you pledge to work tirelessly for whomever wins the Republican primary?
John.
Emphatic yes.
Vince.
Yes.
Mrs. Barrett to Mr. Chapman.
Mr. Chapman, do you support the federal government seeking the death penalty for those convicted in the Boston Marathon bombings?
Yes.
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 Mr. Perini to Mr. Cogliano.
Mr. Cogliano, do you support the elimination of the so-called death tax?
Yes.
Mr. Shores?
Oh, yes, I do. So, excuse me.
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Stebbins, we'll start with Dan Shores.
Mr. Shores,
Yes.
would you support would you support a constitutional amendment to require a balanced federal budget?
Absolutely.
Yes.
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 Who said the Republican Party was the party of no?
Yes.
Yeah. Now we're going to have closing statements, 2 minutes each this time, gentlemen. We'll start with you, Mr. Allegro.
2 minutes, I planned for 3. All right, so first I'll cut out my thank yous.
There you go.
I'd like to say thank you to the moderator and the panelists and for everyone who helped to organize this thing. We need 100 more of these between now and November. I have to choose which sections of this to cut out. I'd like to also, and I will not cut this out, I would like to thank my supporters. The only way I'll ever really truly be able to thank you is to work as hard as you and to make us all proud in November, so thank you. Now, some people, like the current occupant of the White House, like to profess that this country needs fundamental change, right? But I understand that the United States is not just a landmass in North America. The United States is an ideal. It's a destination for millions of immigrants. It's a land of freedom and opportunity. To strengthen the to fundamentally change the United States is not to strengthen it, but rather to erase it. So, when somebody in the White House or your current member of Congress, who does so as quietly as possible, professes to support these policies and this agenda to fundamentally change the United States, you need to question his wisdom, you need to question his intent, and you need to show him the door. So, we also don't need a permanent class of politicians in Washington, D.C. I like to tell all of my people that we need politicians, we need statesmen like John Adams and Patrick Henry and later on Davy Crockett, who went to Washington, D.C., did the people's business, and then got back on their horses and went back to their plow and their pen and took care of their own business. So, who would have believed, listen, I want to leave you with a note of optimism. Who would have believed 5 years ago that a state like Wisconsin, and I'm a rational optimist, I take in the data, I review it, I analyze it, and I make my judgment. The data coming in from the 50 states is good. Who would have thought 5 years ago that Wisconsin would have a Republican governor, a Republican state senate, and a Republican house? Who would have thought that we would do that this November in Massachusetts? Thank you.
Thank you again to the members of the Sandwich Republican Town Committee for having the debate, and all the people who gave up part of their Sunday to come here and learn about the race and other candidates. I also want to thank my opponents. I have great respect for all of you. And I know that any one of us would make a much better congressman than the current incumbent. However, with the job we're all seeking, experience matters. I'm the only candidate before you whose accomplishments include working at the White House under President Reagan, at the SEC as an enforcement attorney, and as an agency head for Governor Romney. I know how to balance a government budget. We did it here under the last Republican governor without raising taxes. I've worked in the trenches, first for Ronald Reagan, then for Mitt Romney. I'm not afraid to tackle the tough issues, and I know how to get things done. I can win in November. That's why I have the support and endorsements of people like U.S. Senator Scott Brown and Gabriel Gomez, our U.S. Senate nominee last year. As you listen to everyone here today, in essence, you're interviewing each of us for the position of congressman. We answer to you. You are our prospective employer. Who do you want to hire for the job? I hope when you consider everyone's qualifications that you decide that I'm the one with the right experience to get the job done. I would be honored to have your support and your vote today. Thank you again.
Vince?
This has been quite an experience. This is actually, I wasn't on the debate team in high school or anything like that. I do like to talk. Everyone who knows me knows that you always have to give me a 30-second and then a stop. But being in a debate is quite different. It's been my job here today to try to convince you that I can best represent you in Washington because I have business experience, because I've dealt with real-world problems and know how to solve them, that I've had political experience to a certain extent. I was a selectman for 6 years. Like a lot of folks, I was one of those people who never wanted to be involved in politics. I used to be in the media, okay? So I distrusted all politicians. It wasn't until, Vinny knows this guy, Fran Marini. You know him too, Jeff. Fran Marini told me when I told him I wasn't interested in getting involved in his campaign back in 1994, he said, "Oh, Vince, you're one of those people. You like to sit around and complain about how bad government is and how bad politicians are, but you're not willing to get off your butt and do something about it. I understand." I went home and I thought about that, and anyone who knows Fran knows how strong he can be, and I got involved. I was working 6 days a week. I had a lot of other responsibilities with our farm and everything, but I found